I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. My practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. The practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly. Through my practice of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Now we'll just do a little bit of meditation to start. So make sure you're seated, seated comfortably. Actually, in another class, we'll go over a whole bunch of details about meditation posture and all that, but that's not for today. So for today, we'll just say, just sit comfortably. And let's start. We're not going to mainly do mindfulness of breathing, but we'll just do that to settle our minds first. So just kind of bring your attention to your breath. Just breathe in, be aware of the present moment sensations of breathing in. As you breathe out, be aware of the sensations of breathing out. Some quality of kind of alertness or awareness. Just kind of really notice your present moment sensations. If the mind, or when the mind starts to drift away to thoughts or feelings or ideas, you just notice that without judgment, and gently bring your attention back to the breath. Next, while we're in this meditative mode, we're going to kind of shift our focus subtly, so that we're no longer focused on the breath, but instead begin to notice your mind itself. Notice awareness itself. You're noticing still your present moment, at this point, your present moment sensation, your present moment experience of the mind. How the mind is aware of sounds, of thoughts. Notice how your mind, in each instant, right, has this awareness. You can be aware, the mind can be aware of your body, of my voice, the words, of ideas. So you're kind of noticing this continuous stream, this flowing stream of awareness. That's always there. And from our previous discussions and meditations, right, you can even subtly be aware of how there's a subject, the subjective aspect of the mind, right, that's knowing, the knower itself, and then objects of knowledge, right, whether that's an awareness of your body, an idea, a thought, a word. So there's this experience of a knower, and then of an idea, or a thought, or a feeling, or an emotion that's known. And that process, right, you're just noticing in your own experience how that process is happening now. Like a stream, like a continuity, a continuous flow. And so for a few minutes together, we're just going to do a continuing meditation. We're going to imaginally trace that, or through memory and imagination, we're going to trace that flow backwards. So it's totally clear, right, totally obvious that our present moment stream of consciousness, right, is related to to that subjective experience when we first woke up this morning. There's somehow like a river flowing, right? There's a continuity or a connectedness between awareness when we first woke up and awareness now. That there were moments that you could, if you took the time, you could actually trace it back. The awareness in the car, actually the awareness when you first sat down, the awareness when you walked in the building, the awareness when you were driving in the car here, the awareness before you got in the car, walking to the car, the awareness when you were getting dressed in your home, all the way back to the awareness when you first woke up this morning. And that awareness is somehow connected, like a flow, stream, to the awareness when you were asleep, right? Any dreams you had. Even like if you woke up in a certain mood, right, that was somehow connected, even if you didn't remember your dreams. If you woke up in a certain feeling, that was connected to how you slept. Did you sleep well, or did you sleep poorly? That there's some connectedness there to the mind of the sleeper, which is connected to the consciousness or mind of the person who fell asleep, person of last night. As you continue kind of tracing that backwards, there's some kind of awareness of how the subjective experience of a knower, of mind, of consciousness, leads to the next moment, leads to the next moment. And if you trace it backwards, right, you can see this kind of connectedness, or dependent arising, that each moment depends on the previous one. That's where it comes from. It doesn't come from nowhere. It's not like your awareness of today arose from nowhere, right? It depends on the mind of yesterday. You can see that kind of experientially. And if you continue backwards, right, the mind of yesterday, in the same way depends on the mind of last week. That it arises in dependence upon that. That it doesn't arise from nothing. Right? In your experience of subjective awareness, it doesn't arise from nothing, and it didn't arise from a tree or a rock. You can see experientially that it arose from your previous experiences, from your previous subjective awareness. And in the same way, right, just logical, in your own experience, you check, right, that the awareness of you as an adult can be traced back to when you were younger. Both the content of your awareness, right, is influenced by those early experiences, but also the experience of the subject itself, right, arises moment to moment, like a stream, like a flow. And so you can trace that all the way back to when you were a child. And even though we don't remember when we were very, very young, right, it's obvious that our child awareness arose from our toddler awareness. The toddler awareness arose from infant awareness. So we can't remember when we were an infant, but it's totally clear, right, that the mind or subjective awareness of a child arises from the subjective awareness of a toddler, which arises from the subjective awareness of an infant. So you can imagine yourself, right, that of course there's this kind of causal stream that goes backwards all the way to when you were an infant. It's also like totally clear and obvious that an infant's awareness arises from like a late stage fetus. Lots of scientific evidence shows that. If the fetus hears music or mother's voice, it influences the experience of the newborn. So your own awareness, right, that stream, that continuum goes back even to when you were inside your mother's womb. You can't remember that, but for sure it's true, right? That your continuum of awareness goes backwards. Just for a moment, right, you can experientially sort of imagine, where did that your first moment of awareness inside your mother's womb, where did that come from? That first moment of subjective awareness inside the womb came from where? And we'll just kind of let our imagination come back forward, right? Across the continuum of awareness, or childhood, or adolescence, all the way up back, gradually back to now. So you can see, right? This definitely you can see experientially, that even this moment, right? This very moment right now of awareness is connected to your subjective awareness when you began this meditation. And will be connected, right? To your awareness when you leave here today. That there's some kind of dependent arising, some kind of causal stream, some kind of connectedness, some kind of flow of awareness from moment to moment that goes backwards and goes forward in time. With each moment experientially arising from the previous moment of experience. So just for another moment now, before we stop meditating, just try to watch that flow now, again in the present. See how your subjective awareness, right, your consciousness, in each moment arises and then gives rise to the next moment of subjective awareness without a break. Let's kind of come back gradually into a more interactive mode out of that meditative mode. Talk a little bit before we meditate more. So that was the same meditation, right? I didn't go all the way forwards this time, but you get the idea. You can go backwards and forwards. In that meditation, you can imaginally trace your consciousness backwards and forwards. And so that's the one, what they call it, the continuity of consciousness, I think is what they call that. Which is one of the core meditations for this mind. It's one of the, what is it? Actually, I'm going to give these out today, but there are about 4 or 5 different meditations. That's one of them that we're supposed to do in this series of classes. So today I want to, essentially I was thinking about this. So today we're going to talk about a subject related to this idea of continuity of consciousness from a Buddhist perspective, particularly leading into and then discussing what's called the meditation on the perfect human rebirth, or precious human rebirth. And I want to say something, like when a Tibetan Lama, Khensa Rinpoche taught on this, this year, right here. And when a Tibetan Lama teaches on it, they just teach on it, they just present it. But I wanted to, but this is Discovering Buddhism, I'm not going to just do that. And so I want to say something, if you really, this is a traditional Buddhist worldview that we're going to talk about today, right? So I'm talking from a Buddhist perspective, obviously, for this Discovering Buddhism, so that makes sense. I'm not going to talk from some other perspective. But I think if you take it seriously, right? If you think seriously about this particular topic, right? Which is, because from a Buddhist perspective, perfect human rebirth or precious human rebirth is about you, right? This is the Buddhist view of who you are and what your place is in the universe, right? It's your existential condition from a Buddhist perspective, you could say. And if you think about it deeply and take it seriously, I thought about this as I was thinking about presenting, and I thought it makes the weirdest Twilight Zones look mellow or something, or tame or boring, I think. It makes, I don't know, I was thinking of those movies, those movies like The Matrix or the whatever, all those ones, they look kind of very mild compared to the Buddhist view of what the Buddha said of your existential condition. But But to get to that, I want to say something about, there's a bridge from the meditation to that, and it's this. It's that the Buddhist view of consciousness, we have to start with that, right, which was what we were just meditating on. But the Buddhist view of consciousness is important in this context because what it is this. There's a view that consciousness or awareness or mind is beginningless and endless. And actually, I don't want to go too philosophical, but the part of that meditation we did is related to that. And the Buddhist view is this, is that, because the Buddhist view is that everything is dependently arisen, right? Everything is interdependent. That's clear that that's the Buddhist worldview, right? And on a physical level, right, that's, Buddhism says that's true. And if you look at it on a physical level, that's something that our culture, Western culture, has looked at a lot, right? Like in the sense of the interdependent relationships between objects, right? Between physical matter. But so from a Buddhist perspective, though, just this, I want to say a brief philosophical thing. There's this idea that things have what's the word? You could say a primary cause or a material cause is usually the way it's translated. And then conditions, right? Cooperative conditions to arise. And they often use the example of a tree, right? Like, or is that the main material cause of a tree is the seed, like is an acorn, let's say. It's that kind of tree, right? That has the the potential to rise into a tree. And then there has to be all these other cooperative conditions like soil and sunlight and water and so on. But from a Buddhist perspective, everything arises in that way. In other words, everything has to have, a principal cause and then conditions, right, in order to arise. And so from a Buddhist perspective, awareness is the same way. In other words, each moment of awareness has to have a principal cause in order to arise. And from a Buddhist perspective, the principal cause of any given moment of awareness is the previous moment of awareness. That makes sense, right? So in other words, that was why that one part of the meditation. Like, in other words, awareness doesn't arise from a rock, and it doesn't arise from wind, and it doesn't arise from dirt or something like that, right? That the principal, and there are many cooperative conditions. So in other words, the quality of your awareness, for example, if you're a human being, is different than if you're an alligator, right? So then it's not, in other words, it's not denying that there's a relationship between awareness and matter. There is, but from a Buddhist perspective, each moment of awareness is mainly depends upon a previous moment of awareness, just as your body, right? Its main cause is previous day's body, and then there are other cooperative conditions like whatever you ate and drank and so on. So philosophically, there's this idea in Buddhism then, right? In Buddhist philosophy, they would say so the moment of the first moment of awareness in the womb had to come from a previous moment of awareness, which implies reincarnation. So that's the Buddhist worldview, right? Is that beings reincarnate, take rebirth, and from a Buddhist perspective, Buddhist philosophy says there is no beginning. In other words, they say even the Buddha can't see the beginning of that process because there is no. It's beginningless, so nobody can. The Buddha can't see something that doesn't exist. There is no beginning, so the Buddha can't see the beginning of it because there is no beginning of it. It goes backwards infinitely and forward infinitely. And even when you become, there are some Buddhist schools that disagree with this. There are some philosophical tenet systems in Buddhism that say when somebody becomes an arhat, they're extinguished. But certainly I don't believe that any of the Tibetan Buddhist traditions hold to that. I think pretty sure I'm confident all of them believe. There may be some exceptions, but pretty much all of them believe that consciousness continues on endlessly as well. So it doesn't begin and it doesn't end. And actually, Nagarjuna, the great philosopher, the Buddhist philosopher, he says he actually addresses that issue directly. There are some people who thought when you realize emptiness and you become an arhat, then consciousness ends. And he says, basically, Nagarjuna says that's not a reasonable position to hold. He says that because for a thing to end, it has to have there has to be something that's its antidote to destroy it. And he says the understanding, wisdom is the antidote to ignorance. So if you gain perfect wisdom, you'll destroy your ignorance and you'll have an end of ignorance. So because ignorance is a form of unknowing, if you know something, If you gain a genuine, complete knowledge of it, then your ignorance is destroyed, and that's logical, right? He says, but there's no reason why ignorance would destroy consciousness. Ignorance is not an antidote to consciousness. Ignorance is a knowing, right? It's a knowing mind. He says, so there's no reason to assert, he says it's not logical to assert that some kind of wisdom would destroy consciousness itself. Wisdom is a way of knowing, so wisdom would go on then. There's no antidote there. So it's a logical, actually Nagarjuna presents a logical refutation of that other philosophical position. So that's why I said all Tibetan Buddhist schools hold Nagarjuna in high esteem, so I don't think certainly the Gelug patrician holds him, but all of them do actually. So in general, the Mahayana view is that consciousness has no beginning and no end. So that means that your subjective, from a Buddhist perspective, your subjective awareness, right now we're not talking about somebody else, we're talking about you, right? That your subjective awareness, because that's consciousness, has no beginning and no end. Right? And that, and sometimes, so that your awareness itself, right, the quality, the mental, in other words, mind itself is indestructible, in that sense, that there is no, that's what Nagarjuna is implying there, right? There is no antidote to awareness itself. And I want to say awareness here, we talked about this in the first class, right? Awareness doesn't mean conscious awareness, right? Whereas we're talking about subtle level, in other words, there are different levels of awareness. And actually, in Buddhism, there are many, there are many ways of classifying those. But oftentimes, to put it simply, they sometimes classify it as three. There's gross awareness, which is awareness of when your sense consciousness are functioning. That's usually considered a gross level of awareness. Actually, there are really more than three, but so we'll start with that, right? That's one level of awareness, but that's different from dreaming awareness, right? Dreaming awareness is more subtle because your sense consciousnesses aren't functioning, and it's harder, when you have a dream, right, it's harder to remember than it is sensory experiences. So dreaming awareness is considered a more subtle form of awareness, but that's still awareness. And then to give another example, deep sleep, right? Deep sleep is much more subtle than dreaming awareness. But deep sleep is still a subtle form of awareness, and actually people who, if you practice, like there are meditations on this in Tibetan Buddhism, where somebody will first try to become a lucid dreamer, right, to be aware in their dreams. And that's not terribly easy, but it's considered much easier than being able to be aware when you're not dreaming and sleeping. But they say you can do that. Whereas if somebody first gets good at being aware while they're, to lucid dream, where they can be aware of their dream state, and they keep practicing, they can actually then become aware even of deep sleep. When they're not dreaming, there's a subtle quality of awareness there. So all of those are considered subjective awareness. So I just want to be clear, when we say awareness, we're not talking about, like, when I was talking to somebody, that's included, but there are also more subtle levels of awareness. So I just want to be clear on that, because we said it in the first class, but people might have forgotten, or some might not have been here. Okay, so this idea in Buddhism then, right, is that each moment awareness arises from the previous. One can and actually, I'll say one other thing too about past and future. There's a saying, they say that one of the you see, like I said, even a Buddha can't see the beginning, right? From a Buddhist philosophical perspective, a Buddha can't see the beginning because there is no beginning, and Buddha only sees things that exist, not things that don't exist. But they say that. Like they say that, for example, in some of the sutras, in some of the stories, there are stories where they would say an arhat, like a great meditative person who had achieved a very high level of realization, they could see so long into their past lives, but that they say a Buddha keeps seeing. In other words, there's a quality of he can see endlessly past lives. If somebody asks him, he can see that. He sometimes says that in the sutras. If you read the actual Buddhist sutras, the stories of the Buddha, oftentimes it'll say that, right? They'll say this many eons beyond eons, this happened. And somebody will be asking karma questions, and they'll say, well, why did this happen? And they'll say, well, because this happened, and then it led to this, and so on. But so it's there on all the Buddhist teachings. So I'm just going to keep going to lead in, before we stop, and we'll have a discussion about this and stuff like that. But I think it's better to keep going and kind of put the Buddhist view there. So the Buddhist view then is this: if the consciousness or awareness has been continuing backwards endlessly and forwards endlessly, one thing that's quite important for this next meditation, the meditation on the precious human rebirth, is that the Buddhist view, and we'll explain why in a few minutes, but Buddhist view is that you have not, therefore it's not tenable or reasonable to assume that you've always been human. And the Buddhist view actually is that being human is rare, is extremely rare. And actually, I'm skipping ahead here, but that part's pretty logical. And there's that part we can observe because of beings with awareness on this planet just alone, right? The percentage that are human are extremely, extremely small, right? Most are, because Buddhist view is that insects and fish are included in beings with awareness. So the vast majority of creatures on this planet, right, are actually are insects and fish, really. And then animals are, right, other animals are much smaller number than them. And human beings are particularly rare, right? Like if you look at, so one time I forgot that, I should have looked it up. There's a number, somebody's done, there's some scientists who tried to estimate what percentage, and it's very low percentage. But anyway, so even, very few are human, right? Very few of the creatures we can see, that we can observe, are human beings. But so, the point I'm getting at is this, so from a Buddhist perspective, the Buddha taught, and that's why I brought this painting. This is actually, say something about this too, the painting I brought is kind of, to me, a few times I brought it to the center. It's always interesting to me to bring it because they say that this is this particular, I mean not this exact one, but pretty close to it, where has been taught, I'll hold it up in a minute, or I can hold it now, but this image was used by Buddhist teachers in ancient India, soon after the Buddha's time. An image very much like this one. And so, I'm not going to, there's a lot of, actually this particular image holds a huge amount of the Buddhist teachings within it in a kind of symbolic and codified form. Like each ring has meaning, and you could spend days or months teaching on it. So I'm not going to try to, well, I probably couldn't teach everything, and also I'm not going to try to pretend to, but the parts that are relevant to our current discussion are what I want to explain. So one is, they call it the Wheel of Life. So, by the way, this is the Wheel of Life. So who's that? Yama, death. Right? That the Wheel of Life is held in the mouth of the Lord of Death. Right? What's the meaning of that?
Life ends in death.
Yeah. There's no mystery there, right? And his fangs are there because you can get chomped on any time now. that's not mysterious either. We know that with that part. So this part you already know, right? Whereas you know that your life can end any moment, and that those fangs can come down, and whatever. Like what are those? Accidents, cancer, heart disease. They're all there, right? And there's that you can die anytime. So this is a symbolic representation again, because this is the Buddha describing our existential condition, right? So this is an artistic description of the Buddha's not saying there's some guy who looks like that who's standing over you and he's watching you or something, right? That's not what the Buddha's saying. The Buddha's saying this is an artistic description of your existential condition, that you can die any minute. That's clear. At the center of the Wheel of Life are three animals: a snake, a cock, a snake, and a pig. So what those symbolize is what we talked about last time. In other words, what it's saying here is, why are those at the center? Those are the cause, right? Those are the cause of suffering. This is describing the wheel of samsara, right? The Wheel of Life is a description of our existential condition. Our existential condition is samsara, right? Which just means a cycle of suffering. So what's the root of that? These three symbolize the three root delusions we talked about last time. Remember we talked about those? So and if you look here, the snake, and actually sometimes they're all three connected. This one, in this drawing, they're not all connected. But the snake is coming out of the mouth of the cock. That's because the cock, who's right at the very center, symbolizes ignorance. Right? So ignorance is ignorance of our existential condition, ignorance of the true nature of reality, is the ultimate cause of suffering. Then out of that come the other two, which are, the snake symbolizes anger, and here's a pig, symbolizes desire, right? Or craving, or attachment. So, there's not any, this is not, what's the word? Obviously, it's an artistic representation, right? So it's not saying, what's the word? It's not really against snakes, for example, right? It's just a symbolic representation. But so you get the idea, right? That out of ignorance come craving or attachment and anger or hatred. And then from that, all of samsara manifests. That makes sense, right? So again, you get the idea. It's a representation of an idea. So, and ultimately those lead to suffering and death. Right? So then, how much to go into detail? But anyway, so the idea is this, is that caused by those three, one takes rebirth endlessly in samsara. These are actually the 12 links. I'm not going to go into detail about those, but these are the 12 links of dependent origination that were taught by the Buddha. They're in the Lamrim, and we'll probably talk about them at some point in discovering Buddhism, but I can't remember which module right now. But the 12 links describe the process of how, in this life, or in any given life, a being creates karma that leads to rebirth. So that's basically, and there's a whole process through which beings, through ignorance, generate either craving or attachment or other afflictive emotions, then do actions. Then when they die, those actions get ripened due to their mental state, and they get rebirth. And so then, this is the part I wanted to focus on for today, though, is that this is a depiction of the 6 realms of existence. So the Buddha kind of categorized rebirths into 6 categories that are kind of general ways of categorizing them. So there are two out of the 6 realms we can see with our eyes. One is the animal realm, right? So that's a depiction of animals. And the other one, of course, that we can see is the human realm, right? But the Buddha asserts that there are 4 other realms of existence. So I have to present those in order to present precious human rebirth. So the biggest realm is hell realms. And I want to be clear about something, because given that many of us may come from a Judeo-Christian cultural background or something, is that hell in Buddhism is not a permanent state. There is nobody, and because that's clear, right? In other words, it's a continuity of consciousness. So, in other words, hell is not permanent, and from a Buddhist perspective, somebody who was reborn in hell is us. There's that we've been. There's you've been in hell endless time, and because you're beginningless and endless, you've been in hell an infinite amount of time. You've also been in all the other realms a different amount of times, from a Buddhist perspective, right? And Buddhism and the Buddhist teachings, if you read in the Lamrim, it lists all different kinds of hells, actually, and that's where I start to talk about that. The weirdest Twilight Zone wouldn't start, and actually Dante's. If you read Dante's Inferno and then you read Dante's Inferno is more mild or something. The Buddhist writers are very, I don't know what the word is. So there are 8 hot hells, 8 cold hells, there are intermediate hells. And if you, I think sometimes in some old Kopan courses, people would go, and Lama Zopa Rinpoche would teach on those for weeks at a time. We could try that if you want sometime, going into all the details of hell realms, but that's not the purpose today. But there are all kinds of different hells, right? Another realm of existence is hungry ghosts. So hungry ghosts are different than hell beings. Hell, the experience in hell, they say, is mainly, incredible pain. That'll be the experience. That's one thing that holds in. And there are these hot hells, right, where beings is more like burning, like typical, right, descriptions. Then there are cold hells where beings are freezing, and there are different degrees of freezing and different. Anyway, so there are all these descriptions like that. Then there are other hells where beings are being chopped up or crushed or all different things like that. Hungry ghosts are different. Hungry ghosts, from a Buddhist perspective, there are different kinds of hells, there are different kinds of hungry ghosts, but in general, hungry ghosts, right, are beings reborn with a kind of a different kind of body than ours, but a body where they're always hungry and they're wandering, and oftentimes there are different kinds of hungry ghosts. There are some who have huge bodies and tiny little, they say, a tiny little mouth. There are others who have a sort of indigestion in a different level than human beings can have, right? Where they try to eat something that catches fire and they vomit it out, or they catches fire and then they're on fire, like heartburn, but to the point where their entire body is tortured. So anyway, so there are all these hungry ghost realms. So the 3 lower realms, I'm just categorizing it. There are 3 lower realms. So the 3 lower realms are animal, hell, and hungry ghost. Then there are 3 higher realms. The 3 higher realms are human, jealous gods, and jealous gods are a bit like the Greek gods. They're these, if you read Buddhist descriptions of them, they're gods who are always fighting for more power, and they're oftentimes fighting with each other, and then they're fighting against the gods. The gods tend to have more power than the jealous gods, so the jealous gods are always kind of frustrated and jealous of the gods because they want their pleasures, but they can never quite succeed in getting them. And so they're always having fights and problems. It is a bit like the Greek gods, right? The Greek gods had that quality. So anyway, it's similar. So Buddhist descriptions of the jealous gods are kind of like that. And then there are the god realms. And there are different kinds of god realms. I just want to mention this because it will relate to the precious human rebirth. In the god realm, they were called desire realm gods. So desire realm gods are like, we're in the desire realm from a Buddhist perspective. Desire realms means everything you've ever experienced or imagined. So a desire realm means beings who are controlled by their desires. So that's us, right? Then there are form and formless realm gods who are in subtler levels of awareness where they no longer are controlled by desire, but they're still in samsara. They're still conditioned by suffering, but they've kind of let go of desire for sensory. So the desire realm gods are basically like partying, or in a realm of a party, right? They're in this realm. They're in these realms where like there's the descriptions of the desire realm gods are places where there's huge pools and everybody's eating like delicious nectar and having sex, or they don't even have to have sex. They just look at somebody and they have an orgasm and things like that. And so those are the kind of descriptions of desire realm gods. So that's one realm of God. What's one type of god realm? Then there are other types of god realms where beings kind of gave up on that and learned through meditation, although not, for a Buddhist perspective, not the kind of meditation the Buddha is recommending. But they renounce that level of desire and achieve a kind of more subtle state that's quite blissful or joyful or pleasurable. And they enter, and there are many different descriptions of meditative realms. And those actually, it's Hindu and Buddhist practitioners actually can enter those experiences. You're still, if you're a human being who's doing that practice, like if you achieve calm abiding meditation, you can actually enter those experiences and experience them. And from a Buddhist perspective, they would say those aren't inherently valuable experiences, but people, they say people can experience that and know what it's like to be in the third level of the form realm, or the fourth level of the form, or to be a formless god in the realm of absolute nothingness, or all these things. If somebody really wants to, you can actually have those experiences in meditation. And they say that if you enter those realms, and let's say you become a meditator, right, and you go off and do that, and then you meditate on those and you enjoy that, and you just focus on that. You think, wow, this is great. Oh, and this one's even better, and you sort of do that, and then you die, then you were born in that realm, which is quite pleasurable. But from a Buddhist perspective, the problem is that the Buddha said it's like, the Buddha didn't use this metaphor, but basically like this, that something goes up and then falls back down. Like you throw a ball in the air, it kind of goes up, 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 it hits an apex, and then it falls back down. So it's a bit like that. In other words, through the force of your meditation, you can die and be reborn in a realm like that, but it's just a temporary respite, and then you fall back down. And then it's quite upsetting, they say, if you've been in that realm for a while, and then you suddenly are thrown back into a body when your karma runs out. They say it's quite an unpleasant, horrible experience. So the Buddha said, don't try to do that. You can enter those realms if you want to through meditation, but mainly focus on... They actually say that, for example, bodhisattvas, right, beings who are trying to achieve enlightenment, they say those beings enter those realms to benefit others, so they don't take rebirth there. So a bodhisattva may enter those realms in meditation in order to understand where beings go and have that experience in order to help others, but they don't, because their intention, because karma means intention actually, right? Your karma is determined by your intention. So if a person meditates in those realms in order to escape a certain other level of suffering, right? Their intention is to get there, so then the karma throws them there. If a bodhisattva enters those realms with the intention of benefiting others, the result of that is just they're more able to benefit others, but they don't take rebirth there. So that's the difference. Anyway, I'm going into more detail than I intended about these realms. But so does that make sense what the 6 realms are? I just want to be sure people get it. That those are the 6 realms of existence from a Buddhist perspective. And so from a Buddhist perspective, I'll continue on now. This comes later in the meditation on precious human rebirth, but the causes, right? You may ask, do those realms exist inherently? Are they some kind of inherently true, real things? So from a Buddhist point of view, nothing exists, right? If you're from a prasangika madhyamaka perspective in Buddhism, nothing exists inherently. So the Buddha would. So if you say that, I mean, the ultimately correct answer is no, and neither do you, right? In other words, hell doesn't exist inherently from its own side, and neither do you, right? Do you? And then if you say, well, do you exist conventionally? Yes. And does hell exist conventionally? Yes. But not ultimately, right? So is there ultimately a hell realm? No. And is there ultimately a you? I'm being a little facetious here, but no. But conventionally both exist, is the Buddhist stance, right? The Madhyamaka stance, philosophically. So now, the causes of those different realms are karma, right? And, I gave an example already, right? The karma, like the kind of karma that leads somebody to be born in the formless realm, for example, is a person enjoys meditating on that, intends to have those experiences, and they create a cause to be reborn there. So here's the point, though, of that, is if you, how easy is it to be annoyed? It's really easy, right? How easy is it to get angry? It's very easy. How easy is it to crave for something you don't have? That's one of the easiest things to do in the world, right? To want something you don't have is unbelievably easy. Then how easy is it to enter deep meditations on a formless realm? Really, really rare and difficult, right? How easy is it? I'm going to compare two different. We'll give another comparison. Like how easy? Start with the one I just said. How easy is it to crave for having something you don't want? Especially at this time of year, just go to the mall, right? Like, will it be easy or hard to crave for something? It's pretty easy, right? Even if you're craving, and actually you may crave for something you see, or you may crave to get out of the mall. Either one is craving for something you don't have, right? Doesn't matter. Like you could crave for a parking spot, you crave to get away from all this crowd, but they're all craving, right? It's all the same. It's all a form of desire realm experience, right? Desire for something that you don't have. But then, compared to that, how easy is it to give rise to love that embraces all beings equally? Like, one is so much, right? It's so easy to give rise to desire for something you don't have. It's so hard to give rise to love that embraces all beings equally. So, from a Buddhist perspective, that's already answered the question of where do most beings take rebirth, right? Because rebirth is not, from a Buddhist perspective, rebirth is not something, there's no God throwing you somewhere, right? There's nobody else throwing you somewhere. There's nobody judging you and telling you should go or have to go somewhere. The idea in Buddhism is that we create these realms through our mind, right? Through our intentions, through our actions, through what we do with our mind, we create a reality, right? And so, if you spend your life, right, most of the time craving for something you don't have, right, and wanting something you don't have, what's that mainly creating the cause to be reborn as? That's a hungry ghost, right? Because a hungry ghost is an expression of a mind that doesn't have what it wants, right? And so it manifests a body and a realm that looks like that, right? Where there's scarcity and you can't have enough and it's miserable. We said it's really easy to create anger, right? What kind of realm does anger create? Anger is, hatred and anger are what create a hell realm, right? So this is, again, do you get the idea? Nobody's saying like, if you don't recite this many mantras, you're going to hell. There's no teaching in Buddhism that says that. That's not the idea. And there's nobody who's like saying, if you don't do this, I think you should go to hell. There's no being that's saying that. Your own mind creates realms through its habituation. Does that make sense? So like, whatever you habituate your mind to, and it's a bit like this. It's a bit like dreams, right? In other words, what you do and what you live in a day, for a week, or in your life, tends to manifest things like that in your dreams, right? And it's really rare for somebody who spends let's say you spend your week, wanting things you don't have, and working and going to the mall. You don't go to sleep, and it's really rare that somebody like that go to sleep and dream of being in a divine realm filled with bliss, where they're seeing radiant beings shooting light rays out and giving each other bliss, right? Usually you dream of stuff like what you live like. And after death, that becomes more extreme, is the Buddhist view, because now at least you have a body that grounds you in some human reality. When you don't have a body that grounds you in that, then it becomes more. The mind becomes more free to create more extremes. Is the idea. So, and the cause, right, of a God realm one of the causes of being reborn is in the divine realm of Brahma, for example, is what I said, universal love. Right? Universal love that embraces all beings equally. That doesn't get you enlightened, actually. That's not a direct cause of enlightenment. But they say that's a direct cause of rebirth in the God realm, for example. So actually, I want to say a few more things about it. So actually, one thing is, from a Buddhist perspective, they sometimes say, if you want to know what you did in a past life, look at your body now. But that's the way to, you don't need it. Sometimes they say you don't need a clairvoyant to tell you what you did in your past lives. Just look at your body now, look at your mind now, and it'll give you some hint, right? And they say, and if you want to know what you're going to be in your future life, don't go to a psychic, look at your own mind. Whereas whatever you're doing with your mind now, well, what do you think? You can't, it'd be silly, right? If somebody says, well, I'm really, I have a really bad temper and I'm really angry, but I think you're born in a divine, beautiful realm, that doesn't make sense. In other words, from a Buddhist point of view, they would say that's a silly notion, right? Because your mind is what creates it, so look at your mind and see what you're cultivating, and whatever you're cultivating, that's the reality that you're habituating yourself to, I guess would be the word. So the point here is this, is from a Buddhist perspective, it's easy to go to lower states of existence or create bad realms, and it's difficult to create good experiences. And again, that, and again, it's up to you if you believe in rebirth or not. All that, that's a different question. But if you look at this question of the cause of consciousness being consciousness, and that if mind is what creates it, then that's logical, right? Because you look at people's experiences, it is difficult to create deep meditative states or universal love or universal compassion or things like that, and it's much easier to get mad. And so, from a Buddhist point of view, the most populous realm is hell. The second most populous realm is hungry ghost. The third most populous realm is animal. So, if you ask, who was I in a past life, from a Buddhist perspective, you have your answer, right? So, the Buddhist perspective, if you sometimes like when people talk about past lives, so I would warn you, don't try that with its Tibetan Lama to say, I think I was a famous person in a past life. The correct response would be, maybe not. Maybe you were maybe you were a donkey, maybe you were in hell. In other words, and you were all those things over and over and over endlessly. Is the Buddhist perspective, and there's nothing so special about that because so is everybody else, right? In other words, that's just the nature of our existence. And also, I'll say one more thing, and again, this is all like background, but from a Buddhist perspective, also, like they say that human life is very brief, but life in most of the other human and animal lives are fairly brief, but that lives in those other four realms tend to be longer. And also that once you're in a lower realm, think about it this way too. If you think of the mind creates the next realm, just to do it like a logical thing, within that perspective. I want to say one other thing. So, if a sentient being is reborn as let's say an alligator, because I used that earlier, how hard is it to give rise to a mind that would then become human again? Like, how hard is it to give rise to a mind that's loving and that wants to make friendships? And it's really hard, right? And the Buddhist view would be it's even harder if you're in a hell realm or a hungry ghost realm, right? And actually, Nagarjuna says that too. He's talking about the value of human life, and he says, think how hard it is for you to practice Dharma. And then he says, just imagine something small, like your arm being on fire. Right? He says, how hard would it be for you to meditate? And that's nothing compared to, because in hell your whole body's on fire. So it's just your arm. What's the big deal? He's being a little facetious there, but in other words, that what he's getting at is in other realms of existence, it's extremely difficult to give rise to virtuous states of mind. So the Buddha. So now I'm getting to the actual point, that the Buddha says that your life as a human being, this is actually, yeah. So the Buddha would say this way, that he, right, is looking at this, right? He's kind of looking at the universe, and he's saying, wow, in the entire universe, there's no better body, there's no better form, there's no better basis for a mind than yours, if you want to get enlightened. And I'll go through why. Because now we're going to go through the 8 freedoms, and this is the precious human. Now we can actually get to the topic, the precious human life. So there are 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. I'm going to call them. There are different translations, but that you have, right? So this is actually about you now, right? So you were going to meditate on this a little while, but I want to first present it. So the 8 freedoms we'll go through first. So the first freedom is freedom from being in hell, and that's a really big freedom, right? Because the Buddha would say, this is actually, and the goal here is enlightenment, right? In other words, if you want to get enlightened, if you're in hell and you're on fire or you're shivering, and again, the same thing, like, the guard just said that one about I think he actually said just even a spark, you couldn't, right? Even if just a spark flew off a flame, like out of a thing and landed on your hand, you couldn't meditate, right? You'd be like, like that. Right? So, and then the cold hell is the same thing, right? Whereas if you were locked out of your house in the dead of winter and you couldn't get in and you had no clothes on, it's unlikely you would be able to meditate, right? You'd be freaking out, right? And so they're just saying, if you're in hell, there's no chance to practice Dharma at all. So there's zero opportunity, or almost zero, basically no opportunity. And so the fact that you personally are free from that is very valuable. And that's where you've been most of the time. But then the second most place you've been most of the time was as a hungry ghost, right? A hungry spirit. And there again, right, it's obvious, right? That if you're, actually, even if you just go to the mall at Christmas time, it's really hard to think of virtuous things, right? But then in this case, you would also have to be starving to death, right? It's not realistic, right? In other words, hungry ghosts don't focus on Dharma because they're focused on getting their needs met. And then animals, right? And animals is totally obvious because we can see them, right? Whereas if you try to teach a fish, to create a virtuous mind, it's not going to happen, right? And even if you have a pet, right? You could try your whole life and they don't, you could teach them tricks, right? But you can't teach them to be, you can't teach them language, right? And so also you can't teach them ideas. In other words, it's for an animal, the idea of cultivating positive things intentionally doesn't happen. Or somebody might train them not to be, to be more peaceful or more violent, but that's more an external thing. They can't train themselves, is the point. And then the god realms, and actually this one's important. So the jealous gods, they say they're always fighting. They're kind of always in a state of war, so they can't they can't cultivate virtue. And the God realm, some people might think, well, I'd like to be a god, actually, right? You can see how that might be attractive, especially when you look at the sufferings of our human life. It could seem attractive to be a god, but there are some problems. Actually, if you're in the form and formless realms, right, in those meditative states, then it's just like a ball that was thrown up in the air. In other words, you can't cultivate any more good things. You're just there kind of, for example, there's one realm that's the realm of absolute nothingness. So it's somebody who meditated on nothingness in their life, which isn't that helpful actually, right? And then they die and they're in this state of nothing, I'm in this state of I'm nothing, everything's nothing, in the sense of infinite, spacious nothingness. And so they're kind of spaced out, and then when that karma runs out and they suddenly find themselves in a body again, and they're like, what happened to me? And they weren't able to do anything more. So if you want to get enlightened, that realm is useless actually. It's just like a break, it's like a vacation or something from suffering, but it doesn't get you anywhere. And then the desire realm gods, right? You can see how actually that's in some ways actually it's bad also. A few reasons. One is you're just using up good karma when you're there, and you can't. It's one way I sometimes think of when I meditate on this one is imagine if you were drunk, right, or high. At a party, at one of those big parties in LA after the Academy Awards or something, right? With all the most beautiful people wearing the most beautiful clothes and all the most beautiful stuff, and all these and you're supposed to fit in, and also you're drunk and you're maybe high or something, and then think, okay, now practice Dharma, while you're at the party. It's not going to happen, and this is much more extreme. There's a story that's sometimes told of Shariputra, who was one of the Buddha's students. Then he had this student who was a layperson who did a lot of good actions and was very devoted. Whenever he would see Shariputra, he would bow to him, and then when he died, he was reborn in a god realm like that, and that Shariputra went to visit him, and I think if I remember right, he just went like this or something like that. That was all he could acknowledge of Shariputra because he was so caught up in the goddesses who were around him, he couldn't focus on Shariputra. But anyway, that's sort of, I mean, you couldn't, right? In other words, if there's too much good happening, too much sensory pleasure, it absorbs your mind, and then your mind can't focus on. And also, like, try to focus. I mean, think about it too. Like, if you were in a god realm, surrounded by everybody who's like blissed out, and then if the goal, part of the practice, one of the most important, probably the most important practice for getting enlightened, well, one is renunciation. Right, giving up on desire realm, that's not going to happen. Another is compassion. How are you going to develop compassion in a realm where everybody's blissed out? Right, so it doesn't work there. So the human realm, according to Buddhism, is the only realm where first of all, you're intelligent enough to reflect on yourself and cultivate good things. You're not suffering so much that you can't do it, and yet there's enough suffering around that you can reflect on it and develop compassion. Right. If you're, so it's very unique, the human realm. So just being a human being, they say, from an existential Buddhist perspective of the universe, is unbelievably rare. There is very small, and that's logical, right? Especially if Buddhism is correct, if the Buddha was correct that there are way more beings in hell and hungry ghosts than animals, well, then it's very true. I mean, if that's true, then it's true, right?
So if there are infinite of these realms, how are there more in other realms?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I guess that, I've thought about that too, that question. And the only way I can, my understanding of it anyway, and I may be wrong, but my understanding of it is this, is that it's like if you do a large, if you were to do a large sampling of any section of the universe, there would be more of those realms. Does that make sense? Like, that if you were to check in any one part, you would find very few humans and more of this other, more of those other realms. So it'd be you'd have to do a sampling somewhere, right? Because you can't sample infinity. You're right.
Infinite in space and infinite time. So if I sample in space and
yeah. So if you sample at any time in space and time, then you would find there's more of that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. You can't sample infinity. Like from a mathematical point of view, it doesn't make sense. You can't sample infinity.
I have a question that I mean to ask you. I don't know if this is the right time or not for it, but I think you might have an interesting perspective because you're like a doctor and everything too. But like I know for me, this issue comes down a lot to the brain and cause the materialist view that we kind of live in is still has a real grip on me, just because I've grown up with it my whole life. Is that and what it boils down to me is well, is consciousness a product of the physical brain, or is the brain just an instrument for consciousness? And it's so hard to wrap your head around that. Do you have anything you can say to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge subject, first of all, and, but I guess I'll say this it's
there's obviously a huge relationship. I'm sorry.
Right, no, there's clearly a cause. I mean, there's clearly everybody agrees, both Buddhists and non-Buddhists, everybody, I think everybody agrees that what's happening in a person's brain affects their experience of consciousness. That's obvious. But I guess a couple of things, well, one is what I already said. I'll start with this. One is what I already said. That from a Buddhist perspective, they would say that the experience of awareness or consciousness is experiential, right? And is not. And is an experience of consciousness, of awareness, which is not matter. So they differentiate matter and consciousness from an experiential point of view, and then say each has its own continuum. That's one thing from a Buddhist perspective. In other words, that matter has its continuum that's beginningless and endless, and that consciousness has a continuum that's beginningless. So both are, in some sense, beginningless and endless. That universes form and reform endlessly, and that awarenesses continue on endlessly, and so on. I'll add too, though, in some of the interesting, I put on this not even suggested, but optional reading lists. There are some, one person who's written probably the most on this from a Western perspective of anybody is Alan Wallace, who's a PhD in something, I don't know, he has maybe in Buddhist studies, but anyway, he's quite a philosopher and he's particularly studied this issue of consciousness from a Western and an Eastern perspective. So one thing I would recommend, if you're really interested, I would recommend reading some of his books.
Cool.
He's probably written most intelligently and interestingly on this, and has met a lot with neurologists and neuroscientists. And I don't want to try to summarize his work today, but I'll say one comment on that, which I think is interesting that he points out, is that the idea he points out he also has done a fair amount of the history of the ideas, and one thing that he points out there is that that actually the idea that consciousness is an epiphenomenon of matter, right? Actually never had any particular scientific or philosophical basis. In other words, it was just something that people got interested in the brain and then said, and were able to show that, for example, that certain brain injuries led to certain inability to remember, inability to, do things like that, inability to cognize certain things or certain kinds of emotional experiences. He said, and that's all clear. Everybody accepts that that's true, but that doesn't prove anything. Actually, that has no proof about the nature of consciousness, where consciousness comes from, and that there became this tendency then, though, in a certain historical period, in the history of Western science, to then assume that consciousness is just an epiphenomenon. He said actually that when you look at the history of how that idea came about, there really wasn't any scientific reason to assume that, or philosophical reason. It was just a kind of an assumption that came about for various historical reasons that related to the distancing of the church, of Christian churches from scientists, and a kind of history of the relationship between Christian churches and science in terms of history of ideas and history of also geopolitical issues. And so in part there was a dualism that developed in terms of the history of ideas that really wasn't based on any specific scientific or philosophical reasoning as much as the times in which those things arose. And so one thing that he was suggesting to some of the scientists was, well, that becomes just a matter of faith for you, which of course then scientists first would get offended by, because they say, what are you talking about? I'm not doing anything out of faith. But actually, I've seen, when you see the dialogue, I mean, he's been part of some of those dialogues in the Mind Life with the Dalai Lama. Yeah. He's been in some of those, and I'll just have one last experience with that. That I remember that actually was an example of this. I thought it was many years ago. I was at one of those Mind Life. The only time I ever got to go to one, it was at MIT, and the Dalai Lama was having this dialogue, and he wasn't trying to. His Holiness the Dalai Lama wasn't being as historical as Alan Wallace would be about Western ideas, but there was a neuroscientist there who just kind of took it for granted. He was like, of course, the brain and the mind are the same. And I remember watching as His Holiness the Dalai Lama started saying, well, why do you think that? And what's your reasoning behind that? And the guy was like, what do you mean? It's not, and you can see the Dalai Lama was like, no, that's not but what's the real reason? And then I remember the man said something like, I can't remember the exact words, but basically he said something like, well, if somebody's on drugs, then they all have, then they all do this or something like that. That shows that they're, and the Dalai Lama said, first of all exactly the same? The guy said, no. And then he said, and have you tested on people with particularly strong minds or just people who have addiction? And he said, no, it's been addicts who we tested on. He said, well, so you haven't tested on somebody who for example, meditates or has a very strong. Like I said, no, we never thought to test that. And he says, well, you can't prove that. Doesn't prove anything. And they were having this interesting debate. He's like, that's just not proof. The Dalai Lama was just doing what debate, like what Tibetan geshes do, which is debating. Debating through. And the guy, and you can see the guy's like, I mean, at a certain point, the guy wasn't saying, oh, I'm wrong, but he was like, oh yeah, that's not an. He came to the recognition, it seemed, that it was an unexamined assumption. That was all, and that he had to examine it. That it was reasonable that somebody would say to him, you should probably examine that more. Right. So to me, that was an interesting moment of that. But I would recommend, if you want to really go in depth on it, to read Alan Wallace a little bit. And he has stuff on the web, but he has a number of books on this topic. And from a Western perspective, he's as good a writer on it as anybody. or he's written more about it in the more deep and philosophical way than anybody else.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I should, let's see. Can we have until what time? 12:30. Okay, so we should keep going. Okay, so I want to say, so I want to finish off the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments, just to go through this meditation, right? So if you were meditating on it, what you would do is you would think, you would actually imagine, okay, I'm not in hell. If I were in hell, I couldn't practice something spiritual. And you could actually imagine, you know, if you were meditating, you actually imagine, oh wow, that'd be terrible also. Thank goodness I'm human, right? The idea here, emotionally, is that there would be some feeling, first of all, of self-esteem, right? Of valuing yourself. Also some feeling of joy at being human. That's part of the idea here, right? It's a bit like, I think I've sometimes, some of you have heard me say this before, I often think of Scrooge in the Christmas Carol on Christmas morning when he realizes he's not dead. And he's so happy to be human, right? And that he can still practice generosity. Actually, that's what this is getting at, in a way. It's a state of mind a bit like Scrooge on Christmas morning after his 3 visions. But okay, so you're not in hell, you're not a hungry ghost, you're not an animal, you're not a god who, one of those gods. But now among humans, so the first, of the 8 freedoms, those 4 are unique to just being human. Then there's that, just the fact that you're human frees you from those. But then there are 4 more freedoms that compare you to other humans. Does that make sense? Or so you have 4 freedoms that some other human beings don't have. So the first one is, there are different translations to this. Lama Zopa, I think, in this book, translated as a barbarian, by which, I don't know if it's bad to say this, by which one could, you could think of, like, because I think sometimes when Americans think barbarian, we always think of somebody in the third world. But I think what Buddhism means is a normal American. So, and somebody in the third. That's not only Americans, but I mean we'd be included. And there is like my ancestors and or most of our ancestors would be included among barbarian. And it's not actually in some sense also barbarian. I don't know. I mean the translation seems a little judgmental. Also, I think so. But and it's not saying the intention here is not to be mean or judgmental to a barbarian. So I don't know if that's the best word for us to use right now, but what it means is to be born in a remote area where there's no dharma, right? And so the person, you could be born human, but in a place where there is no dharma teaching, so you don't know anything about it, right? So it's not like saying they're a bad person. It's saying they never got any education in how to cultivate compassion, how to cultivate love, whereas it's not part of their culture, right? So nobody ever taught them methods, right? And so if you think of your own. If I think of most, right, like somebody who's brought up, and just like is brought, like I think of like a lot of people like grow up with it. It's not judgmental. It's just like if you're brought up to think, well, how do you make the most money and how do you like get ahead, and that's the purpose, and just do it. Come on, get a good job, get a good education, try to move ahead of other people, buy a big house, like, that if that's the way you're raised, that would be considered from this point of view that you don't have access to dharma, right? So that's the meaning of that term. So so there's lots of people right in that situation. Next one is again there are different translations of this, but the real meaning of this next one is if you were born as somebody who can't understand language or ideas. So there are human beings, like for example, if you have severe autism or severe mental retardation, or if you were born in a place where there aren't like for example in Tibet, if you were born deaf, you wouldn't be able to access the teachings because most people, you wouldn't have learned, most people were not able to read. If you can't hear, then what are you going to do? You're not going to access the teachings. But so if you were born in a way where you don't have access or you can't process language enough to access the teachings. The next one is a person with wrong views. So that's different from the barbarian who can't access Dharma, right? This one means you have access to Dharma all around you, but if you think, for example, if you believe there's no such thing as enlightenment, and the idea of trying to become enlightened is stupid, right? That's a wrong view. That would stop you from seeking enlightenment. It's impossible. There is nobody who believes enlightenment, that there's no such thing as enlightenment, is going to seek enlightenment. Does that make sense? So that would be the meaning of that one. And that happens all the time also, right? Like, In other words, anyway, it happens all the time that people have that view. And then another one, the last one is being reborn at a time when there's no Buddha, there's no Dharma, there's no Buddha came. So that, so you're, in other words, and they say that actually places where a Buddha has manifested are quite rare. Right? So the point of these 8 freedoms, right, is you're not in those lower realms or other realms, including the God realm, and then also you don't have these other problems that stop you from practicing spirituality. And then there are 10 endowments, or 10 good things that you do have. Right? So I'll just go through those more briefly now. 5 are personal endowments about you, and 5 are environmental endowments about where you took rebirth, where you live. Does that make sense? The 5 about you are, 1 is you're human being. The next one is you live in a place where the Dharma exists. Sometimes they call it, in a literal translation of Tibetan word is central land, but it means just a place where Dharma exists. Like we all almost missed that. Right? From the point of view of Dharma, we all almost missed that because Dharma didn't exist here, right? Just a little while ago, but now it does. So in terms of, and again, this is just practical, right? If you want to access Dharma, you have to be someplace where Dharma exists. And there are lots of places on this earth where it doesn't exist, right? There are lots of places where if you try to access Dharma, it's against the law, for example, right? Like the most populous country in the world, parts of that country, right? China. In some parts, and sometimes it's illegal to try to access Dharma. And then, I've known friends who were from some countries where they said if they just said, "Oh, I want to study the Buddhist teachings," they would be beaten or thrown in jail or killed or something by their family. I had a friend like that who told me that. Okay, so you don't have access to that. So so you were born in a country where you have the freedom to practice Dharma, and it exists if you want to. The third one is you have functioning sense faculties that allow you to practice Dharma, right? So you have ears that can hear, you have eyes that can read, look at pictures like this, you have a brain that can process that information, and not everybody has all those faculties, right? And the next one is, the fourth one, is that you haven't done what are called the 5 immediate or heinous, there are different translations, negative actions. They say that if somebody's done these are the 5 actions that lead to rebirth that are the worst, that lead to the immediate rebirth in the lower realms when you die, and they're particularly heavy negative karmas, and if you've done them, it's really very, very difficult to practice Dharma. There are things like having killed your mother or father, having killed an arhat, who achieved enlightenment, achieved a certain level of enlightenment, wounding a Buddha, somehow if you attacked a Buddha or something like that, or if you caused disharmony among the Sangha, right? In other words, if you're somebody who went and got 2 groups of monks, started telling rumors in order to get them to hate each other and fight against each other, those are all considered very bad karmic actions. If you did one of those, it really it's very, very difficult to then make spiritual progress in that same lifetime. So I don't think any of you did any of those. And the last one, of the 5 personal good qualities you have, the 5th one is some degree at least of belief in the teachings, right? Doesn't have to be perfect, but you have an interest and a belief that the teachings are interesting or make sense, or you're interested in trying to practice. So those are 5 good qualities that are personal. And then I'll go quickly through the 5 environmental ones. One is a Buddha has come, right, to this planet. That you happen to be born on a planet where a Buddha came. Some planets don't have that. The Buddha taught the Dharma. Because, for example, there are people who were in India who were born. There's a famous story of when the Buddha was a baby, there was this soothsayer, and the Buddha's father called that soothsayer in and said, "My son seems to have these unusual marks and auspicious signs, and what's the meaning?" And that soothsayer said, "Oh, wow." This is, he was actually a correct soothsayer or something, and he was able to say, "Wow, this is a really unusual child. He's going to be somebody very remarkable." But that soothsayer wasn't going to live long enough to hear the Buddha's teachings, right? So he was born at a time when the Buddha had come, but he didn't live at a time when the Buddha had taught. So that's an example. Next one is this: that the lineage of the teaching still exists as an actual lineage. In other words, like that it's not broken. And sometimes certain lineages do get broken, actually. In other words, like the Buddha taught something and then it just dies out, right? But and some of the actually, sometimes Tibetan lamas will say this, that actually some of the lineages have already died out. But the main ones, in other words, the teachings on emptiness, the teachings on compassion, the teachings on bodhicitta, the teachings on tantra, all those, the teachings on the stages of the path, all those still exist. Eventually those won't. Eventually the lineage will be broken. There won't be anybody left who actually has a lineage of practice coming from the Buddha. So that won't always be the case, but right now it's still the case. For however long, who knows, but it is. And the next one is that there are people who actually practice and have realized the teachings. In other words, and that, I sometimes think of that one, there will come a time, and the Dalai Lama himself, the Buddha said this, the Dalai Lama pointed this out a few times, or says this, in other words, that there will come a time where that doesn't exist, right? Whereas where people, when you want to, if you, let's say there will come a time on this planet where somebody will see a statue or a stupa, or a painting, and they'll say, wow, cool, what does that mean? And there'll be nobody left, and it'll be like ancient Egypt where people make up ideas, people say, oh, I think it means this, and some book said that, I guess it probably means this, and they speculate and they make things up. And sometimes you see where people do that about Buddhism and they're wrong, they see about Tantra especially, people make up ideas, they see something and they make up something and then it's not correct. And so there will come a time where that's all that's left. Like now, there are still realized people, who actually are in this lineage, coming from the Buddha, and have practiced, have meditated, and have gained the realization of great compassion, or bodhicitta, or of emptiness. And so if you study with them, right, then you get a kind of definitive experiential, almost like a transmission that comes down, but there will come a time when it just doesn't exist, and there will just be some books and some pictures, and people guess what they meant, and it won't have much ability to transform anybody's mind then. And the last one is that there are still people who are kind and will help you to have access to those teachings, right? So if there aren't people to help make a center, right, or a place, then even if there's realized people, that doesn't help you, actually, right? And sometimes that happens actually, right? Where there's there are a lot of stories like that, even in recent times, where there's somebody with great realizations and they're hanging out, but there's no translators, so nobody can study anything with them. Or they're hanging out somewhere in a little house meditating, somewhere in a room, but there's nobody to organize something, so nothing happens, so then people can't. So even though there's all the other things exist, if there's not somebody kind, and so this last one actually is something that we us here can actually be, right, for others if we want to. We can create that for other people if we want to. So actually these 10 endowments, that's the only one that we now for sure we can create. The others are difficult to, you have to actually realize it before you can do the other, but you can at least create the environment if you want to. So those are the 8 freedoms and 10 endowments. So if you're meditating, right, on the perfect human rebirth, actually, so there are actually 3 topics that you would meditate on. So I'll go through these. So the first one is in identifying if you have this, if you have a perfect human rebirth. So you would actually analyze all of those and see, do I have that or not? Right? And so if you do, right, then the idea would be that you would meditate, you would think, wow, that's amazing, right? But then there are 2 more topics. Because, let's say you figure out you have something. Pabonka Rinpoche says, in his teaching on this, that was part of the assignment reading, he says, he says something like, if you find out that I think he says your fireplace or the foundation of your house, which is, I don't know if you guys read it, but something like that, is made out of stones of pure gold. First thing is you have to know that they're made of gold. And the second thing is you have to know what gold is, right? Like, if you told a child that, who didn't yet know what gold was, that wouldn't necessarily help them either, right? Because if they don't know the meaning of gold, right? So first thing is you have to figure out that you have something, and then you have to figure out if it's valuable or not, right? So the first is identifying, do I have a perfect human rebirth? But the second is understanding its value for you. And the third is understanding its rarity, how rare it is. And all of these are things that you actually would meditate on, right? That's the point. In other words, there are things that you have to meditate on. So the first is you would actually meditate and think, do I have all those things? Am I not in hell? Am I not a hungry ghost? Am I not am I not an animal? Am I not a long-lived God? Am I born on a planet where the Buddha came? All those things. You would actually analyze it. And then you would think, well, what's the value of that? Okay, yes, I have those qualities. What's the value of having that? And the idea is this, is you would think, well, all those other beings and all those other existences don't have any freedom to do what I have the freedom to do if I want to. And if I take that freedom, what's the result for me? Right? And what Buddhism is asserting, and I want to go through this because it's an important point in case you want to meditate on this, is it means that, first of all, if you want to have a good future life, it's easy, actually. The teachings exist where you could easily create the karma. You could meditate on universal love and you could be reborn in the God realm or something. Right? That's easy to do, actually. If you study the Buddhist teaching, the Buddha taught you how to do it. It's like not hard. If you go do a retreat on it, it'll happen. In other words, you can do that. You just go do a retreat, and you can cultivate universal love. It's not, the teachings all are there to do that. Then, if you want, not only can you have a good future rebirth, but you can gain realizations, actually, right? Like you could realize emptiness. You could realize bodhicitta. Like that's totally possible. All the teachings exist. You have the right kind of body, the right kind of mind. You can gain like all kinds of amazing realizations. Then, and this is the part that's quite remarkable, is if you want to actually, you can destroy the root cause of suffering in yourself in this very life. You can become an arhat who destroys ignorance. And the idea, right, if you think of it existentially from the Buddhist perspective, what they're saying is you've taken rebirth like not, and again, Prabhasa, you hinted at this, right, about infinity. Like 500 trillion is the same as nothing compared to infinity. Right? So you've taken rebirth infinite times, is the Buddhist perspective. And in this life, right, which is quite brief, you can end the cycle of rebirth and suffering if you want to. That's what it's saying. So I mean, again, you have to understand from a Buddhist perspective the value of that. If you're contemplating, I'm just saying, if you want to contemplate it, you have to think that way, right? And then, not only that, but you can achieve enlightenment, right? You can become a Buddha to benefit others. And because like the unification of Sutra and Tantra exists on this planet, you could actually achieve enlightenment even in one lifetime, they say. So you can become a Buddha who can like then benefit others infinitely for the rest of, because your mind doesn't end, right? I've said that. That would mean that for the rest of existence, infinitely, you'll just benefit others blissfully. Right? And you can achieve that in this lifetime. So that's what the Buddha is asserting. And then the last is the rarity of appreciation rebirth. And there are three ways to think of that. One is the causes. We already did that, right? In other words, it's really hard to create the causes of appreciation rebirth. Hardly anybody is doing that, right? Next one is nature, right? That if you look around, most beings aren't human, and most humans don't have a perfect human rebirth, right? They don't have all these other qualities that are listed. They're actually pretty rare. And the last is by example. And I'll just share one of the examples from traditional Buddhist teachings, which at first I didn't like this example. I didn't relate to it, but now I actually find it useful, so very useful. So I'll just share it. It's the example of the turtle, the blind turtle. You guys, probably some of you know that one. Right? So that example that was taught by the Buddha, which is a metaphor for this, is he says, imagine, right? It's an imaginary exercise. He says, imagine a blind turtle under the ocean, in the oceans, right? And it started this way. Imagine that you put that blind turtle in the ocean, in the Indian Ocean, and then you toss a small golden floating ring in the Pacific Ocean. And once every 100 years, the blind turtle comes up for a breath and then goes back down. And the Buddha says, how long will it take until the blind turtle comes up through the ring? The ring's kind of floating around, and sometimes it freezes down in Antarctica, sometimes it's in the Atlantic, and the turtles in the Arabian Sea, sometimes, and so on, right? And you would say, maybe it'll never, it's not clear, right? It's not clear it would ever go through that ring, unless you think of beginningless and endless time, right? If you think, okay, in infinite time, eventually it would happen, right? But you'd have to say, if I thought in 100, it comes up once every 100 years. So in 1,000 years, it would definitely not happen, right? Almost certain. In 1,000,000 years, almost certainly it wouldn't happen. In 100 million years, almost certainly it wouldn't. But if you start, but an infinite amount of time, eventually it would happen. But how often? Right? It's blind, so it can't do it. Also, that's the other thing with the blind turtle. Blind symbolizes our ignorance, right? That's why the turtle's blind. So that means that the ring could be here and the turtle could come up right here and it wouldn't move over, right? But that happens all the time. Like, I sometimes think of my friend Tashi, Kensho Rinpoche's attendant. He talks about that there are these, he was telling me, he wasn't criticizing, he was just saying, he was telling me a story about some neighbors of their monastery who live right there, know Kensei Rinpoche, know the other monks, and then they stole stuff from him. Like that was the, they thought, what can I get from this experience of living near this monk? Well, I'm going to take their stuff. And Taji said, that's okay, they can have it. He's very sweet. He said, they need it more than we do, it's okay. But that's like that, right? In other words, you're right there, you missed it, you did ignorant, right? Ignorant. What can I do? I met this perfect, I came across perfect teacher, I'll steal from him and then go back. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying, like, that's like that, right? In other words, you came so close and you missed, right? Instead, you made some bad choice. How tragic, right? Nobody, somehow, like, don't have the, some of these qualities, right? Don't have faith in the Buddha, don't have an interest, you don't have some, all the, maybe have a wrong view, right? Some kind of wrong view that misunderstood something. And so you have an opportunity and then you do the opposite of what would help you. Right? So that's like the blind turtle, right? And so then if finally you came up through the ring, what they're saying is make use of it now, because the odds of it happening again, unless you use it well, are zero, right? Like pretty much. Okay, so that's how you would meditate on precious human rebirth. And the idea at the end of that, right, if you did that, is you would feel like, it's like, Lama Zopa says, how like if somebody wins the lottery, they're excited. Right? Like when you see somebody win the lottery on TV, they're always jumping up and down, right? And it's correct, right? In other words, that's meaningless, right? Like, there's even psychologists, like, because I get the APA stuff, like, they do studies and they're actually not, a year later, the person who won the lottery is not any happier on average than they were before they won the lottery. That's been shown in they've done scientific studies on that kind of thing. So it's actually totally meaningless, right? Whereas you've achieved something infinitely more meaningful, right? So the point here is you should feel joyful and inspired and have a sense of incredible worth to your life, incredible value to your life, where every moment feels so precious because in each moment you can take the essence and achieve those things or not, right? And your precious human life also isn't something that you then, what's the way to say it? It's now, right? In other words, that's what you have right this moment. So it's not that you think, oh, later I'll make use of it or something. It's like you're supposed to really feel inspired. That's the, not you're supposed to, but if you meditate on this correctly, you will feel inspired. A few things. So one is, so we didn't, of course, because it took longer to kind of present the context, we didn't meditate on precious human rebirth, but we kind of presented it, right? So what I want to suggest that people do is to try out that meditation. Again, with the goal being, well, one is goal just being to see what it's like, but the other goal is to see what your experience is, and and how it makes you. And I want to say just one other thing about that too, which is this: I think there's another implicit value to precious human rebirth. One is of course feeling a value in every day of your life, right? But another is it also gives a longer perspective. I think if you do it, in other words, if you actually engage in that meditation, right? And I want to say, this is just my own observation. One is, if the meditation affects you, one is you start to feel a sense of value of your right, a value of your days. But another, because of this long perspective of beginningless and endless and countless, I've just noticed, I actually first noticed this when I was around Tibetan lamas, because I think that's their worldview, right? And that then, temporary problems don't seem, if you think of yourself, if existentially you think of yourself as somebody who spent most of infinite time in horrible realms, and then a problem comes up, it doesn't seem that, and it's a different context for that problem where it's who cares? What matters is, it's kind of like when somebody has been really sick and then they feel better, or something, they appreciate, and then something else that goes wrong is not so important, right? If you meditate on this regularly, I think it gives a little bit that kind of feeling about any day, though. It doesn't have to, you know what I'm saying? So I just think it's worth experimenting with and seeing what the results are experientially. I guess that's my point there. So that's that. So I just want to suggest give that a try. Then also, in terms of discovering Buddhism itself, I wanted to say a few things, because this is the last class here of this series, right, on mind and its potential. So next Saturday is the final retreat day for this series. That'll be in Manassas. Actually, we'll do it on the back porch of my house. It's enclosed and heated, but back there. So obviously not on the porch like outside. So anybody who wants to come to that, who's attended classes, is welcome. You know, even if somebody hasn't attended, I guess they can come if they want to. You know, and so that'll be like a one-day retreat, and it's on the website, but you know, it'll be there. And I guess about that, I want to say. So one is you know, and that day is going to go, what is it, from 10:30 to 6:30, I think? Mm-hmm. And we extended it by 1 hour because of the missed class. So I'm going to also present one more new subject, which are the Buddhist philosophical, actually it's philosophical, but it's also, I guess you call it, but it's also about epistemology, really. But 7 ways of knowing, which are, I think, are very useful for if you're going to do meditation, for self-assessment. So that's why I wanted to present it still, even though we didn't get to do it here. I'll do it there. And then we'll do a fair amount of meditation on these different subjects and some more discussion exercises and things like that, and all that. Also, in that class next weekend, people who are on the track of wanting to become facilitators or teachers, come up to me at the end because I want to give you an assignment to lead a meditation next Saturday, just so that you start having the experience. Does that make sense, of guiding? And it'll be brief, like 15 minutes, something like that. But so I won't, that also it's nice for me, I get to take a break from the meditation. Now also, separate from that is this, people who are taking Discovering Buddhism, not to be, this is whether you're thinking to become a facilitator or not is irrelevant to this, but if you're taking it to complete it, right, if you're really taking the program, then for each class there's going to be a completion card, and this is the one for Mind and Its Potential, where basically, and I want to be clear because some people have asked about this is how this is going to work. I'm not, I'm not going to take attendance here and write down if you came or not, right? And I'm not going to, ask you, did you read all the assignment? Did you read every page or something? But it's an honor system thing. So you have to fill it out yourself, and at the end after the retreat, and then hand it in to me, just saying that you did it, right? And I'm going to put this on the website too. The page about this is in terms of attendance, right? Like we have lectures offered, lectures attended, and did you make them up? Now, in this case, we can make them up due to Matt's kindness via the website. But the expectation I'm putting out, and I'll put that on the website too, I think, or on something to people, is that if you wanted to survey the class, you can just take it. Or anybody can just show up whenever they want. But if you're taking it for completion, like if you really want to take it to complete it, then you should do the readings, you should do the meditations, and write down that you did them. And also, I think the expectation is people should attend in person at least 75 to 80% of the classes. Everybody's going to miss things over the course of 2 years, and that's you watch them on the video. But in other words, the expectation would be if you're really taking it to come to at least 75% in person, and if you have to miss occasionally, then that's totally fine. I think that's a reasonable plan. And so So what I want to do is pass this out. I'll just give you one. We can each take one. Only take it if you're taking it to complete it, and then you can fill it out if you've done those meditations and so on. So that's that. Just 2 more things. I had said I would do this, so I'm going to do it now, and for people who aren't here who are coming next time. So next time, also, in order to, again, this is only for people, if you're just surveying the class, you can still come to the retreat, it's fine. But if you're taking it, and actually, I'm going to give this out to everybody next time, though. It will be like a little final. The goal, I'm going to give you the questions now, right? So this is not to make hard on you, but it's to make, the idea here is to study, right? It's to be familiar with this stuff. So I'm just going to say, I'm not going to give you every single question exactly, but you should know what the definition of mind is, right? If we're studying mind and its potential, that's a fair expectation. You should know what the 3 root delusions are, their names, and what they actually mean, right? Like what actually are they? We went over all those other delusions. You should know at least one or 2 others, like what they are and what they mean. I'm not expecting anybody to memorize all 50 or something like that, but you should know a couple of other ones, 1 or 2 others. You should know, remember we had a whole session on Buddha nature. I think people should be familiar with at least one of the metaphors, the traditional metaphors. Remember there are these metaphors like a statue wrapped in cloth, or like somebody who has a jeweled treasure hidden under their house, but they don't know it's there, or like, anyway, there are a whole bunch of traditional metaphors like that. Like a precious stone that's encased in muck. There are metaphors that are metaphors for what is Buddha nature. And there was so you should be familiar with at least one metaphor and what it means, right? They all have the same meaning basically. But you should have actually there are differences. We can go over those, but you should have at least a sense of what is Buddha nature and what's a metaphor what's one of the metaphors that traditionally expresses the idea of Buddha nature. Does that make sense? And also on this precious year and rebirth meditation, I'm not asking people to memorize the whole meditation. It'd be great if you want to, but you should know at least, let's say, 4 or 5 of the points by heart. So those aren't hard, right? You're not in hell, you're not a hungry ghost, you're not in a place where no Buddha ever came. You have sense faculties that work so you can process the teaching, right? You should know at least a few of those. Does that make sense? So those are the basic expectations for that. Okay, and let's dedicate our good karma, right, our merit or whatever. So let's any good karma that we created, any positive understanding, any new insight, any sense of self-respect or treasuring our life, right? Anything positive that we created, so we dedicate that good karma or good energy or good insight, right, to benefit ourselves and others, right? In particular, to be able to liberate, right, ourselves and others from suffering, which is the meaning of compassion, right? So that that the purpose, right, of being together today, the purpose of thinking, contemplating, discussing, meditating, right, is not just temporary, but is particularly related to compassion. So compassion for ourselves and especially compassion for others. And one other point, like in the dedication, right, is to think also that we do have this unbelievably precious situation, that we're more fortunate actually than others, right? There are countless like non-human beings, like animals and so on. There are countless people who don't have freedom and don't have access, don't have opportunities that we have. So let's particularly like dedicate our merit with a sense of responsibility, right? That we take responsibility to make good use of our lives and our opportunities to be of benefit to others and to help others directly, and then also to help others like indirectly, right, by progressing internally so that we're more capable of helping others. So let's dedicate this goodness to be able to directly and indirectly help others, to continually progress on the path to enlightenment, so that we become more and more capable of being of help, of service, of having wisdom, so that we can liberate ourselves and others from suffering.